Alright, what time is it? 7:31 p.m. I had a day from hell today. Not too much went right today from the time I got up till, I don't know, till after dinner. Well, just before dinner. But anyway, I guess that's just the way it goes. It just seems everything I touched went for shit, starting with trying to get this morning's video done. That was brutal. That probably took me almost 5 hours. Isn't that amazing? Then what? Fencing. Both my back tires are getting flat from logging road travel. I'm just going to swap over my other tires. And I had one leak right on the top corner. Expensive. Then I took him to the tire place, said, no, that's just too borderline for them to be able to do anything about it. Then he goes, oh, and your rim's ruined too. Oh, good. So now we're looking at rims and tires. I'm going to shut up. I can go on about these petty things when there's a lot more and more important shitty things going on in the world today with so many people, including home here in British Columbia, where basically the province is on fire right now. People getting evacuated, getting homeless all over the place, and they can't get insurance because it's considered an act of God. Forest fires are considered an act of God in the Okanagan, where numerous communities are burning up right now. And the people of Hawaii. Yeah. Lots to be frustrated about if you care, right? If you don't care, I guess life is just bliss if you don't care today, right? Because there's a lot going on out there to care about. Anyway, I took a time out because I had to, and just went through my inbox or my emails, and I went way back and I just started reading emails to see if anything rung a bell or not. And hopefully I have some brand new ones that I previously had on my phone in my 2,500 email folder that got wiped without being read. And now I just have to go by my memory. If it sounds familiar or not, and I hope that I don't repeat. But anyway, one more quick topic. Listen to this one. Straight through to my next door neighbors, through that forest. There's a woman there, a single mother, with a 17-year-old boy. He's autistic. And if you didn't know anything about autism and heard him next door or seen him, you'd probably be thinking, oh my God, what's wrong with that poor kid? If you didn't know anything. Now, she's a very, very great woman. Very aware, very knowledgeable, educated woman, doing it on her own. I guess the previous husband couldn't handle it. Whatever, he's out of the picture. Whatever. Moving along. So when we first bought this place, Sarah and I are out of the front end of the drive, alongside the road. And here comes this woman. And we live on a dead-end road, right? She's the next house over at the end. And get this one. Here comes this little blue car. And we're actually working on the gate, replacing the gate, whatever it is. And she stops and pulls over and waves and says, hi, I'm Jackie. And all of a sudden this boy, who does not speak fluent English, says, Steve and Sarah. Just like that. We'd never met them ever before. The lady did not have a clue who we were. Nothing. And I remember going, whoa. No taken. How did that happen? Managed to get caught up in BS with the lady. And then, and no, he wasn't online, and no, he didn't watch my YouTube channel or anything like that. Now, a couple years later, we're starting to get to know her a little more. Everybody's fairly private when you live rural here. There's no community hall down the road. And there's a few other challenged individuals that live around here that are seem to be angry at the planet and have signs up saying, warning, this is, vigilant neighborhood, etc., which is fine. But we're starting to get to know this woman a little more. And Sarah went over there the other day, and she was talking to her and hearing more of a story. We've already previously told her over the fence, hey, get over here anytime. You need help. You got help right here, right? She's had a rough go with a couple of the neighbors around here. Anyways, she said that the boy is so intuitive. She says, he's not, he's actually quite smart. He's not what he might seem. And I'm like, well, without a doubt in our mind. We're not justice, we're not the judgy types, we get it. But it's backpedal, so the one time we were standing at the fence talking to her, and you can see him in the background, what he needs to do is he needs to put on miles, she says. He's got to put on some miles, and he'll all of a sudden go running all the way to the end of the property, and he'll turn around, he'll run all the way back, he'll run over there, and he'll run over there, and she just says he's got to put on some miles. And then I noticed him standing out there in the back 40, and then all of a sudden I seen a deer literally walk right in front of him, grazing on the ground, and like this deer was within petting range of him. These are the same deer that are my property, and they don't do that with us or anybody else. But I took note of them, like, holy cow, and I remember nudging Sarah, I go, check it out. Look what's going on over there. Anyway, so Sarah went over there yesterday, and this lady said to Sarah that her son can read minds. How incredible is that? I'd have to verse Sarah more on that conversation to get more accurate, deliver to you guys. I'm just going off of, oh yeah, get this one, you know? I didn't prepare for this as usual. And she also said that when they go down to the river, the eagles gather over wherever they're sitting along the river. The eagles will gather in a tree above her son. What? She also said that all of the deer routinely go walking right up to him in the yard and hang out right beside him. She also, when she went on to the mind reading part, she said that the child knows your intent from the word go. And she's got one particular neighbor who's not so friendly with her. And every single time her son sees him or that man has to come onto the property, he goes ballistic. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting, right? But we have heard in the past, a few different people have mentioned about autism and the Sasquatch beings. Who knows? You never know. Not saying the Sasquatch are autistic. We would never ever be able to say that without studying an individual or speaking with a group of them, and they fill us in about autism and their siblings or whatever, right? But I can almost see him through the forest, or maybe it's their llamas. But anyway, I find that very, very interesting that this young man may have some of the skills that these beings have, and he's an autistic teenage boy who cannot communicate verbally with the English language. Amazing. Interesting. Very interesting to me. But anyways, and yes, the young man has had favorable, positive reactions when I'm there. I'm innocent. But anyway. Chime in back. If any of you out there are very aware of autism directly, not reading it from a book, I mean directly as in a relative, a friend, sibling, email me about it. Email me something I need to know. Or the people that need to know, right? Alright, the babble is done. Alright. These are all from back in my inbox. This is titled A Few More Strange Encounters. Hello again, Steve. This is the second time I've shared some of my encounters of these beings with you and your followers. I haven't missed a video yet, and I try to gather as much info as I can about these creatures so that we can better protect ourselves, but also learn to live beside them without pissing them off or becoming another 411 victim. I am Joshua Allen from New Hampshire, and living with my girlfriend, we're only a few hundred yards where we grew up in the woods. When we were young teens and out with our pellet guns looking for squirrels to shoot, my buddy Tim said he saw something a few hundred yards in the brush walking away from us. He claimed it was a Bigfoot. Until I started asking him questions about his sighting. Even to this day, he blows it off or just says, I don't know, and laughs it off. In another instance, my brother claims he saw a few Bigfoot dancing around a group of trees. We worked on getting closer, and we ended up coming to a huge pile of moose standing around a swamp in the middle of winter. There was a few smaller ones, so now at my age I'm wondering if those were in fact a small family unit possibly hunting them. At the time we didn't know how dangerous moose were, and we got to within probably 60 yards of them, and something told us we should probably leave them alone and back away, and we did. Now that I'm grown, I'm a lot more knowledgeable about life, death, and things things that aren't supposed to exist, yet they do. I hadn't seen evidence of ghosts until I had my first kid and was working with my mom. As soon as her girlfriend passed of cancer, I started experiencing haunting/ghost experiences. One time I even walked out and saw my month-old son floating in air with bright lights surrounding him, and then fell back to the pack and play. So at this age, I started realizing that not everything is as it seems. Yes, some of it is. Now I spend so much time in the woods. I hunt small game daily. Spent most of my days out in the woods, often camping at night and only coming back to eat/drink and then go back out for the day. Last summer, I took our new pup, Remy, short for Remington, LOL, for nightly walks to a leaf dumping area around our trailer park, and almost every night we would see this fox. He never paid attention to us. My dog never seemed to notice the fox approaching us, coming to within 20 feet from us. We almost seemed to be friendly, often talking to the fox. One night around 2 a.m. when everyone was fast asleep, we again went for our nightly walk to the same area, and this time, fox didn't show up for about 15 minutes. We just stood and waited. Eventually, we heard the fox's bark/screams coming up the back road, and we waited patiently. This time, the fox appeared across the street in a guy's yard, just looking at us, barking occasionally on feeling, sorry, major typo and some punctuation mishap there. Just looking at us, barking occasionally, feeling afraid of not knowing. All of a sudden, something probably 80 feet up, an oak tree, launched out of one big oak and landed across the street into another oak. The sheer impact shook the huge tree and it rained down acorns for minutes. Several times, hundreds, if not thousands of acorns rained down on the road, and you could hear the direction just from following the sound of these nuts. Eventually they stopped at the tree line. I heard a couple gibberish words, and I was spooked back down the road and back to the house. Twice I walked right up to the tree line at 2 a.m. and just stood there and listened. And both these times my hair stood on end, and something said to walk backwards away from the woods. Had a bad feeling something bad was going to happen, so we left. A few days later, my girlfriend was riding home from work. Third shift, right down the road, there's a farm. It was 3 a.m., and as she came around the corner, she saw something dart across the road on all fours. She said it kind of looked like a bear, but moved way too fast. It was all dark, and she said its movements were strange. Where she pointed where it went in was where me and my son noticed huge breaks about 30 feet up. There were fresh trees, broken, and then laid vertical to mark something. I knew it was significant when I saw it. When my girlfriend got back home and told me about what she saw, we went down the road, and at the end of the trail there was 2 deer standing beside the road, and they looked scared shitless to go across the street and into those same woods I grew up in, where everything has happened thus far. I believe she interrupted a Sasquatch family hunting. These are just a few more things I'm remembering at the moment. I love what you're doing, Steve, and I believe all of our stories and information will help arm people with the much needed info they need to prepare themselves when it becomes the time to cross into the believing/knowing about these forest people. Thanks again, Joshua Allen from New Hampshire. Joshua, appreciate you, man. Wow, that's quite the description about the acorns raining down. You put me right there. That sounds pretty frickin' significant of an experience, right? Amongst everything else. Of course, the girlfriend seeing that thing low to the ground too fast, which has been a pattern and a description of these beings. It's endless, right, you guys? Isn't it crazy how endless it is? Just wiping my greasy fingers on these readers. Sarah's quite proud of herself tonight because tonight we had homegrown peas, homegrown potatoes, and homegrown chicken for dinner tonight. I think the only thing bought was the plates it was sitting on. So that was pretty cool. Pretty cool. It's cool to see somebody so proud, beaming from something like that. Now, moving along. Next, it's amazing how many people are coming forward. It sure is a freaking good thing. Alright, a brief encounter from September 2006, Vancouver Island. Hi Steve, I'm really enjoying hearing some of these stories and experiences that you are sharing. And even though I am from the UK, I too have a brief encounter to share. I'm 51, and I've lived in the UK all my life, so when my wife and I married September 2006, we planned our honeymoon in Canada, as we wanted to see some wilderness. We flew to Calgary and had a 2-week road trip planned, which would see us end up in Vancouver. It was mid-September and warm. When we arrived, and after an overnight stop in downtown Calgary, we drove to Banff and then up the Icefields Highway from Banff to Jasper. We stayed for a couple of nights in both places. There were some unseasonable storms around, and we even had snow, but the roads were good and we were undeterred. We did the usual tourist spots: Lake Louise, Spirit Lake, Athabasca Falls, the trip on a glacier, and then we headed west towards BC via Mount Robson Provincial Park and taking the road south to Clearwater, where we stayed overnight before heading to Whistler via Duffy Lake. Wow, you just rattled off sighting central, that entire route. Robson, right where you cross the Jasper, when you left the Jasper Park, and that sign with the mountain goat on the left, that is where the RCMP in Jasper told us that there was a pile of sightings reported nonstop. Then you headed to Clearwater. Well, between there and Clearwater is where my old girlfriend had that one running beside her car looking in the window. And then of course we went to Duffy Lake, where half my old neighborhood has seen these things on that road and in the mountains around it. 2 weeks we were on the road, but inevitably we made it over to Vancouver Island on the boat to Nanaimo from Horseshoe Bay. We had a couple of nights in Nanaimo and in Victoria and drove out to various places. One trip took us up to Ucluelet, which is right up the road from the house. We decided we would do the Rainforest Trail, amazing place, and that we wanted to head all the way north to Tofino on Highway 4, Pacific Rim Highway. Again, another place where there's sightings on the highway non-stop. Both places. The weather was slightly closed in, with occasional glimpses of hazy sunshine, and we had yet to dip our toe in the Pacific. So, when we saw signs for the Combers Beach trailhead and found an empty car park, we thought we'd have the place to ourselves. We parked up and headed over to the notice board. There were a couple of Park Service notices about a cougar spotted in the area a couple of days previously, but we were not fazed. Surely would have moved on. We had heard they would likely avoid us, as would the black bears, that we should keep the conversation going so any wild animals would hear us before see us and make themselves scarce. The trail to the beach looked pretty clear from the car park, and it was only meant to be 1 kilometer or so of hiking. We started off down the trail, and under the forest canopy it was a little gloomy in places. Despite our willingness to want to talk, it pretty soon became apparent that this was very forest, and we both admitted to feeling a little nervous about continuing. We had no bear spray or anything to fight off a bear or cougar. After no more than a couple of minutes, we reached a bend to the right in the trail. There was some old gnarly redwood stump, and it seemed gloomier than ever. What was worse, though, was the atmosphere. It was oppressive, and both my wife and I stopped and, without saying anything, looked at each other. We instinctively knew something was not right, and then the smell hit us. It was unwholesome and foul, like rotting flesh, but mixed with horse manure and urine. At this point, the hairs of my forearms and the back of my neck stood entirely on end. My wife said, "Okay, let's just go back to the car." And I did not hesitate in agreeing. We walked calmly back despite the urge to run, but had a real twitch and kept looking behind me every other step. I felt sure we were being watched, but heard nothing and saw nothing. Apart from the sound of our feet on the trail, there was no other noise. Not so much as an angry chipmunk, like the many we had already encountered on this trip. I should say at this point that neither my wife nor I had any understanding that a Sasquatch was anything but a myth. We'd seen a life-size representation of one at Quisitis Visitor Center a couple of hours earlier. Alright, that's just right here, gas station around the corner up here. Well, a mile that way. A couple of hours earlier, where it was described as a First Nations legend from the past, like the Thunderbird. We knew nothing about people having actual regular encounters, or tree peeking, or any associated odors. I definitely knew nothing about infrasound and what it can do to the senses, or even that these beings may have some powerful mental abilities to instill fear and dread and get people to back off without needing to engage visually. It is only with hindsight and some exposure to tales of Sasquatch encounters over the last few years that I now understand what might have happened to us on that little trail. We were desperate to see the wild Pacific beaches, but not so foolhardy as to ignore our instincts to turn and get the hell out of there. We got back to the car and the sense of uneasiness did not leave us until we had exited the car park by turning north on Highway 4. Our next stop was a Long Beach campground, only a few miles up the road with good clear access to the beach. So we had our beach walk and thoroughly enjoyed the rest of our remaining few days in the Pacific Northwest. The encounter did not ruin our trip at all. In fact, we never so much as gave it another mention until maybe 10 years later when I was watching a documentary about cryptids and a Sasquatch/Bigfoot encounter was described. It was only when they referenced the foul smell that the memory came flooding back, and weirdly, with just a little bit of thought now, I can take myself back to that day and relive those feelings. Automatically, my hairs stand on end. Like they do for every one of us. I get why people want to talk about this stuff. These encounters are very real to those that have them and leave more questions than answers. We have no frame of reference that allows us to make sense of them. I don't know whether there's a conspiracy or government cover-up. If my understanding of government is anything to go by, and I live in the UK, which has to have one of the most effed up governments of any country right now, they are probably just as clueless and don't know how to define it or bring it into the public domain without causing either panic or pitchfork-laden hunting parties. Perhaps they feel these beings would be in more danger if the truth were known. Who knows, right? Anyhow, thanks for continuing to share these experiences for everyone. You have a very calm way about you, which usually conveys warmth and compassion when you read out the encounters. All the best for the rest of 2021. Cheers, Gerald. Gerald, I apologize it took me so long to get to your email, but I'm glad I did. You went through my hood, man. You went through all my back roads, my frequented routes, and you basically almost drove right by my house. Almost. Now, you clued it. There was a lot of people who've emailed me from there with basically ongoing daily sightings. Nightly sightings. Tofino Highway, non-stop. Is what it is, right? I agree with you. On to your topic about speaking about your government, just a quick side note, with my looking into everything I can and trying to make sense of it and find the source. Right now, I would, all arrows point to the British government as being possibly one of the most darkest on the face of this planet today, for certain. For certain. Close second, obviously we know which one that is, but I'm just trying to narrow down to the source of the most grief for all the people of the planet. And myself in my journey, I've nailed it down to that as possibly more than likely the number one source, for sure. Unfortunate, very unfortunate. What else could I babble about? Quick other mention, we were talking to this past group of anglers. They're on the boat. One group of Americans, one group of Canadians, all successful, educated, and very calm demeanors and rational thinkers. And I asked all them, so what do you guys think? We're going to be coming in for another one of those lockdowns? They're going to dump another one on the community? And every one of them said, yep, they're guessing somewhere around November. Isn't that amazing that apparently, I haven't looked into that too much myself because I don't have too much concern for it. But when I hear rational thinking, educated people from a couple of different countries in one place and ask them the same question, and they all didn't even think about it. They all said, oh yeah, they're going to do it to us again sometime around November. All right, if that's the case, then how many of you are going to comply this time? That's the big question. Because if you don't want to comply, then you don't have to, right? And I'm going to urge everybody to start acting like a free human being. If you can, just try to do it. Quit being scared and intimidated. Pretend you're a free human being and go with it. All right? Follow my lead. Anyways, I remember a handful of years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, I forget who it was that said it, but I remember hearing that long ago that the mainstream was going to pull a alien invasion on our asses. 5 or 6 years ago, and now here apparently that's going to be going down here. Well, it's been going down drip feed to us lately, right? From the dark idiots. But I think Sarah just said that she heard that it's official. They're going to be introducing aliens to us shortly. Do I believe in other beings? Absolutely. Do I believe that the people who are in power get in contact with other beings? Absolutely. Do I believe that aliens are directing the people in power and influence over us right now to inflict all this atrocious shit on our asses? I don't know that for a fact, but it would not surprise me at this point. There has to be some kind of an explanation for all of this chaos going down, right? I mean, it's just a little bit too much. We can't have that many ruthless human beings that hate human beings on the face of the planet today, can we? You know what I mean? It's very frustrating to watch. So I don't know. Why did I mention that? Because that's all I know. And it's apparently being delivered, and I want to touch on it right away. And maybe somebody will come forward with what they possibly know. Now, I'm babbling away, aren't I? Here's another one. From the archives, in a way, people patiently waiting, a girl, a horse, a few dogs, and a monster. After many, many years, I'm ready to share my story. I've never told anyone about my experience. I listened to you for the last couple of years and appreciate the way you allow people to get this off their chest. My name is not important. I'm now a 64-year-old woman, but this happened to me when I was almost 17. I was born and raised in the country. Mom stayed at home and Dad worked in the oil fields. We lived in northern Oklahoma, near the Kansas line. I had a younger sister. There was a girly girl, but I was a tomboy through and through. The son my dad never had. He couldn't keep me inside the house. I spent my days on my horse, riding many miles each day. It was my heaven on earth. Many times I'd take an after-dark ride, looking at the stars and enjoying the solitude. This particular evening, I decided last minute to grab my horse and take off. Probably to get away from my sister or some other teenager angst at the time. It wasn't unusual for me to just grab a blanket only, no saddle, and a halter with the head rope fashioned into the reins and take off. I always hated to put a bit in my horse's mouth. Same. I always rode macaroni just a lead rope. That's it. Anyway, off I went. Tank top, pair of cut-off jeans, low-top Converse tennis shoes, and normal summer attire. I had long, light brown hair that I could sit on. Most of the time I kept it in 2 long braids, one on each side of my head, so-called Indian style. As was normal, I had several dogs following along and maybe a barn cat or two for a ways before they would say the hell with this and head back to the barn. It was dark with maybe half a moon and hardly a cloud in the sky, and down in the low 80s after a high 90-degree day. I headed out on my favorite 6-mile route that took me into the pastures where a small creek snaked through the sand hills. All along the creek was large trees and bushes, taking advantage of the wet areas. I had my horse in a slow rocking trot, her with her head down, half asleep, dogs panting along beside us, and me with my head tilted back watching an unusually active night of falling stars. All of a sudden my horse threw up her head and done one of those dead in their tracks stops that leave you up around their ears. Scrambling, trying not to slip off her back, as I righted myself, I noticed her ears straight up, where they're staring at something. She'd done a quick back step or two, and was shivering, as if she was cold. I glanced down at my dogs, and they too were looking intently off towards the creek, and that's when I looked back between my horse's ears, right where she was staring, and I seen a movement. As I watched, a large, hair-covered animal walking upright came into view. It was about 40 feet away. I couldn't breathe. I was so scared. I knew I was seeing something that didn't exist. It stopped in an opening between the trees and squared up to me, staring intently in my direction, and it was huge. With large shoulders, long arms almost to its knees. In the moonlight I could see its hair was on the thin side, as I could see dark skin on it in several places. It stood swaying slowly back and forth looking at me. He lifted his head as if smelling me, and stared at me, blinking his large eyes slowly. I thought it was a gorilla crossed with a caveman. About that time, one of the smaller dogs growled at the sight, and my horse done one of those nervous snorts they do. The animal turned its body back towards the creek, and in just a step or two, looking back at me, and was gone out of sight. I sat there with tears running down my cheeks, finally taking a few deep breaths. I turned my horse the 3 miles or so back towards home, and off we went as fast as we could go, followed by a couple dogs and passing a couple who had already headed back that way. We hit the barn door, and I slid off my horse and collapsed my legs, weak with fear. I closed the doors and locked them, ran to the other end of the barn, slid the big doors shut, and so did the bar to keep them from moving, and sat there and frozen with fear. Being a teenage girl that loved her horse more than I can explain in words, I was determined to keep her safe. I worried that thing would come to get her, or one of the dogs, so I sat in the barn the rest of the night. At daylight, I noticed the blanket I used to ride bareback was nowhere to be found. I'd lost it somewhere along the creek. I didn't say anything to my parents, probably out of fear they would not let me ride alone anymore, or not believe me and laugh at my story. I slept in the barn every night for weeks in fear that thing was coming to harm my animals. Every little noise would send my heart beating into overdrive. I had a .410 shotgun loaded and ready to protect my horse and dogs. .410 is one step up from a BB gun, but it and a .22 pistol is all I had. Either one would have just pissed off something that size. After a couple of days, I finally got the courage up to go looking for my blanket. I lost. So in the middle of the day, with the sun shining bright, I headed towards the creek area. We were all nervous. The closer we got to the spot where I seen this creature, I spotted my blanket where I'd nearly fallen off my horse. I quietly slipped off of her, threw the blanket on her back, grabbed a handful of mane and jumped back on. A few steps at a time, we neared the creek until we were in the spot we seen the animal. Since this was sand hills, there were no tracks, only large depressed areas in the sand. The dogs were smelling each area, all the while shivering like they were ready to cut and run at a moment's notice. At that time, I seen a branch that was near the creature's head when I seen it, and it was only a couple inches above its head while I stared at him. I rode my horse to the branch, and it was at least 6 inches above my head while sitting on a horse that was 15 hands high, and I'm 5'8". No idea how tall it was, but it was enormous. After a few weeks, I stopped sleeping in the barn, but would often check on her several times a night. I kept that up for several years until she passed away, taking a piece of my heart with her. This has haunted me for the rest of my life, and not a day goes by that I don't think of it and what I saw that night. I've hunted and fished all of my life, but I'm never at ease in the woods. I know what's out there. I feel like I have a knowledge of something that other folks don't. I've married and divorced, had a couple children who I've never allowed to be out of my sight for any extended time. Unlike me, they never jumped on a horse and left for hours, just riding to wherever their hearts desired. A couple times while hunting, I've felt a wave of fear and nausea come over me that I hot-footed back to my vehicle. Was it all in my head, or was I sensing something there? Anyway, it was a life-changing experience that has haunted me to this day. People find me hard to get close to, and I have no patience with stupidity. I now live in a city, but of an evening I can close my eyes and feel my horse under me. Wind in my face with the smells of the woods, and go back to a time before I knew that monsters are real. I'll take this to my grave wondering what that was, and why I had to see it, and live it, and live with the knowledge that they do exist. Thank you so much for this forum to tell our story. The only one I have to skip over and can't listen to is the Mr. Macaroni ones, as they cause the tears to flow. And I dream of the day I might see with my own eyes the beautiful country you're blessed to live in. God bless. Whew. Wow. I appreciate you. I'm sorry that haunted you for your whole life, and that you possibly Might have turned into what's called, what do they call it, a helicopter parent or something like that, or you just hover around your kids because of what you know, what you've seen. That's unfortunate. They didn't get to experience that same freedom you did, but what do, right? I don't know how many parents I've had. I distinctly remember a man emailing me in to see one of his creatures, and he just said he felt like a piece of shit because he just could not let his children go outside without keeping an eye on them. He couldn't do it. And he always had, he always had to have a high-powered firearm within reaching distance. He said he felt he was driving his family insane. So he felt he was convincing his family that he was insane. What a sentence, right? And then you're too scared to share that with your family because you don't want to be called crazy. So you end up acting crazy in front of them anyways, right? For no apparent reason. But that's why we're here. That's why we're here, right? Now we are the safe place, and we are the place to get the honest to God knowledge out there to the people so that people like this brave woman can finally spill it and get it out. And it's like, it must be like almost like having a cancer in you. You just want it out so bad, but it's going everywhere you go, and you can't do anything with it and anything about it, right? I'm super, super glad and appreciative that you emailed us and you came forward. I apologize it took so long to find your email, but what do, right? You know why I can't just, it's so hard to read everybody's email as it come in. It's not remotely possible. There's too many of us. There's too many of us. You know, a lot of you have asked about this right here. This is a tale from Mr. Macaroni right here. I always have something with me, and he's on my keychain, and I also have some jewelry with his hair woven into it. But anyway, there you go, another member, right? Didn't ask for it. Didn't ask for it. Didn't ask for it. Nobody does. Didn't ask for it, and then you end up being confined in your own mind. But not anymore. I wonder how many people are out there right now listening to all of us, and they still just can't do it. They just can't share. And you know what? I know you're out there. I know there's a lot of you out there. And just so you know, it's okay. It's okay. We have plenty shared. But maybe one day you might want to share, because apparently it does help. We get nothing but tons of people saying thank you so much and it made such a difference. On and on and on. It does. We do get that. I don't think we've had any bad reactions yet to somebody sharing their experience here. I don't think we've had one person say, oh man, I wish I didn't share that shit on that YouTube channel. Said nobody ever. Not yet, unless I've missed the email and haven't got to it yet. And if I do, I'll read it. You're damn right I'll read it. If somebody writes in, I wish I didn't share my email, I'll read it. Everybody gets to be heard. But it hasn't happened yet. So, if you're still thinking about it, do it when you're ready. But it's painless. And if you don't want to, but you're going to stay here and hang out, we want you here anyway. 50-foot eye-to-eye encounter is the title of this email. Hi Steve, my name is Joe Bina. B-I-N-A. I live in Orting, Washington. You can use my name. Thanks, Joe. You're a free man. If you're a man. Imagine this is a male name, Joe. I'm 48 years old. I grew up in a small mountain town. I know the outdoors as good as any. I feel and understand your loss of Mr. Macaroni. I own a business of ferrets. My encounter happened about 5 weeks ago, early spring 2021. It was finally a warm, sunny day, so I take the ferrets to a favorite spot of mine, about 6 miles southeast of Prairie Creek, to give them some outside time. My plan was to also look for antlers. I need a few to craft some knife handles. When I got to the spot, a gravel bar on the creek, I let the ferrets out of the carry box to free roam. Then I sat on a log to roll a cigarette. I could hear what at first I thought was dogs barking up creek of me. That was odd to me because I know nobody lives up the creek. I lit my cigarette. The sound of the barking was getting closer. Being a hunter, I noted the wind was in my face. The direction of the barking, I poured a cup of coffee. Oh, sorry, I'll read that differently. Being a hunter, I noted the wind was in my face, the direction of the barking. I poured a cup of coffee. I'd only been at the spot for 4 or 5 minutes when I felt a scratching on my pant leg. I looked down to see all 3 ferrets begging to be picked up. How strange, all 3 wanted to be picked up after only 5 minutes of run time. Wow, it's crazy. I didn't have a clue that ferrets were even that connected to humans. I would have thought the second they saw the forest, it would have been like, I'm out of here. I'm killing squirrels and I'm out of here. As I was putting the ferrets back in the carry box, I noticed the barking was not barking. It had changed to loud mumbles. Then it became more clear to me. It was speech, a foreign language. It was loud, and it sounded like an argument. It was getting very close. I guessed 50 yards off. The creek bank in that direction is undercut sheer bank, about 4.5 feet high. I thought it must be 3 or 4 Japanese people lost in the woods arguing. I caught sight of 2 of them. The one in front was very large. He stepped through the brush and down the undercut bank to the creek bottom with ease. I saw the younger, smaller one, chest up, still in the brush on top of the bank. When I drew a grasp at the sight of the big male that had stepped down the undercut bank, he locked eyes with mine. The one up on the bank turned around. In the strange speech it talked to the others, I could not see. I could hear replies and then moved off, up a steep hill covered in dense brush. There's typos everywhere, okay? But I'm making it work. I was eye-locked with a male 50 feet from me, 9 feet tall, 650 pounds, 5 foot wide shoulders, thick dark brown reddish hair, longer on his arms and legs. His hands hung low, almost to his knees. I dropped my cup of coffee and cigarette as I stood up. It turned back to the bank, said 3 high-pitched words. With one step, he was back up the 4.5-foot bank and gone after the others. I think there was 4 or 5 of them, but I only saw 2. I packed up and left quickly. I've not gone back there. I did cross 3 downed trees on the path in. I heard no birds or other wildlife on the trail in, and yes, I was scared. Or, well, more shocked at the sight of this massive person. Not an animal. Definitely self-awareness and intelligence. Definitely male. I felt no aggression from him. I have no desire to see one again. Let me say that one part of the sentence again. The sight of this massive person. Not an animal. Just making sure you guys don't miss that pattern, all right? That's a pattern I don't want anyone to miss. There you go. Another club member. Didn't ask for it, right? Didn't ask for it. And another oops moment from them bumping into a human being walking on a creek. I've always said it. You want to have a close-up encounter, any kind of encounter setting, just go walk up a creek. Especially in British Columbia, Washington State, Oregon, California. We've got a lot of mountains and creeks. That must have something to do with it, right? Mountains and creeks? Maybe? I don't know. That's how it happened to my grandfather, right? That's how it's happened to I don't know how many people. All you gotta do is walk in a creek. And that's what's always made me aware. But I'm always extra aware in creeks anyways, because creeks are where I know I will go face to face with a grizzly bear as I'm traveling up on my horseback or backpacking. It's happened so many times I couldn't even count, right? So, double trouble. Creeks, grizzlies, and Sasquatch people. What is it about creeks? You know what I mean, you guys? With that is such a huge pattern. What is it about creeks or creek beds that throw their intuition, their sixth sense off to the point they absolutely miss us until they're in visual? What throws them off about a creek? What is it? I want to know that one because it's such a strong, common pattern. It's a huge pattern, one that needs mentioned nonstop, right? Anyway. Appreciate you, man. Thanks for sending that in. Thank you so much for sending that in. That's a lot of time. So generous to share time, especially today. Time is gold, man. Now, who's next? Who's next? It's titled 45 Years of Silence. Hey Steve, my name is Brian Stoner. Feel free to use it. You and I have one thing in life in common. I'm a big guy, 6'8", 300 pounds. I was always the guy breaking up fights and protecting the underdogs. Anyway, I come from Centralia, Washington, Lewis County. Grew up hunting and fishing with my dad, John. My dad was a policeman at the time this happened. Dad had a lot of friends throughout law enforcement and fishing game. Needless to say, we were hunting by Mount St. Helens, within the red zone, before she blew. We were just coming down from the Lily Basin Trail when the old man smacked my arm and said, "Bigfoot." He was always screwing with me, so I blew him off. By the time I looked up, I caught what looked like the back end of a bear. He stopped the truck, but by that time he was gone. I know this isn't very exciting or a large story, but it took me this many years and your videos for me to talk about it. With the old man being a cop, we just kept it to ourselves, LOL. We weren't supposed to be up there anyway. So I want to thank you, Steve. My dad was my fishing and hunting partner and died way too young. He was 59. I was so devastated that I have not fished or hunted since he died. He was and still is my hero. So thanks again, Steve. Your stories brought a tear to my eye thinking about him. I always feel bad because I raised 2 sons by myself without hunting or fishing. Much love, Brother Brian. Brian, I think I read this. Sounds familiar because I know I think I remember saying, "Hey man, it's not too late. You can get back out there. Get back out there." Your dad's probably wanting to grab you by the scruff of the neck and kick your ass and say, "Get in the woods." What are you thinking? Get in the woods, man. Get in the woods. Pass that on. It's the real world, right? It's real world, real life, and real healthy. We're supposed to do it. The bear mentioned, the grizzly bear mentioned the creek reminds me. I forgot to tell everybody that I'm gonna retell a lot of my hunting stories because a lot of them, whatever happened with some of this back in the day, I was really loving learning and trying different things on editing because I love videoing editing. I just do, always have, before I came and met all you. And I'd put all sounds in there and sound effects and music in the background, and I bought and paid for all of them off a place called Pond 5. And then YouTube came along and something's happened, and I keep on getting these stupid strikes for copyright on the sounds that I purchased. And then they're ruining a whole bunch of my past adventure stories. YouTube's doing it, of course, right? So I'm going to retell them when I get time, and then I'm going to post them up on probably the Howtohunt channel, because it won't have any of these topics in the stories. But I'm going to redo all the stories, retell them, and post them up because a bunch of them have been erased and mutilated by YouTube. Alright? Just so you guys know. And a lot of you hunters and anglers out there, you say nonstop, you miss me telling them, so I'm going to tell a bunch of those again, and that'll crack the dust off of my mind and probably make me remember a bunch of other ones I've missed yet. So there. Let's get somebody else heard. Let's get somebody else heard while I'm here. Somebody's been waiting for quite some time. Ooh, this is a long one. You know what? I'm going in. I'm going in anyway. It's titled 3 Encounters with Sabe. Greetings, Mr. Isdall. First, my condolences on the loss of Mr. Macaroni. Believe me, I know and feel your pain. Feel free to read 1, 2, or 3 of all my stories, or none, if you find they are too boring. Anyway, my name is Roy Patton. I've sent you a few emails in the past year, but they must not have measured up to being read. That's fine, I totally understand. Most people think that I'm a little off, so I don't care if you use my name or not. I live in southwest Ohio, about 65 miles north of Cincinnati. I was raised in the UP of Michigan, and all 3 of my experiences happened there in the 80s and early 90s. 2 of them are only a guess the Sabe people who were responsible. My second experience, which I will tell you third, is the one I'm positive was a sabe person because I saw it looking at me. I'm getting ahead of myself, sorry about that, here we go. My first experience was I was 17 and sitting on top of a ridge about half a mile from home. I had built a natural looking blind to hunt deer out of. There were always squirrels, chipmunks, rabbits, and birds picking at my bait pile, which consisted of apples and corn. It was completely legal to use bait to bring the critters in at the time. I never ever felt scared, watched, or anything like that while there, and I was there a lot, pretty much every day after school, from late August on. There are times when there I was armed, hunting squirrels with an old single-shot .22. But most times, like before deer season opened, I was there with only my hunting knife. Like I said, there was always activity from the critters. About the 6th day of the 14-day season for deer in Michigan, that starts on the 15th of November every year, I went up to my blind. I've been seeing a nice buck coming in, but it was always just after legal shooting hours. I had hopes that one day he would come in early. That day, after my school chores were completed, I went and settled in my stool. I noticed after about 20 minutes that the woods were eerily quiet. No critters were around, and if they were all being silent. Even the birds were absent. Not even the wind was blowing. And that's when a feeling of utter terror came over me. My head was spinning around looking for danger because when the woods are unnormally quiet, as you know, it usually means that a predator is around. In fact, a large lynx had been recently spotted in the vicinity by our very unfriendly neighbor. A side note, I witnessed this guy and my dad, God rest his soul, take a trip to Fist City in our local rural grocery store. They were both banned from shopping in that store for 6 months, so the neighbor really was taking his life in his hands coming to tell us about the lynx. I think he knew it too because he was as white as a new bed sheet the whole time he was in our house. I think my dad could tell how uncomfortable he was too. He offered him a chair and a beer, but I think he was just screwing with this guy. LOL. When the neighbor left, my mom chewed my dad's ass for messing with someone that had just come to warn us of possible danger to our livestock. Within a few days of the warning, one of her riding horses came in with 3 very deep parallel slashes on her right shoulder. I knew nothing of karma then, but I can see it now. The vet that came out to stitch her up said he thought the wounds looked like they came from a large cat. There was a 4th parallel wound, but it wasn't deep enough to require stitches. The first 3 were at least 1 to 1.5 inches deep. The 4th one was just a bloody scratch. Knowing all this, I was looking for a lynx. I figured surely that was what was keeping everything quiet. I couldn't hear or see anything. However, I was scared shitless. I didn't understand why. Out of all the time I'd spent there, even when I found bear tracks in my bait pile, and bear scat near my blind a week before deer season, and I only had a buck knife, I had never been so terrified. I suddenly felt like someone told me to leave. It was like the thought was put in my head. I don't believe that I thought it because I was too busy looking around and being scared shitless. A few minutes passed and my fear was building. I heard leaves rustling off to my left, just south of my blind, and then a tremendous crack. About like a highly amplified rifle shot. I almost lost my scared shitless because I nearly put it in my camouflage pants. Suddenly a perfectly healthy poplar tree, about 8 inches in diameter, fell and landed right next to my blind. Some of the branches flattened the side of my blind and left scratches on my face and neck. Even though it was November, there were still a few leaves on the tree. And that happened with no wind, and the tree was broken off about 8 to 9 feet from the ground. I believe that if whatever had made that tree fall wanted to hurt me really bad, it could have dropped it on me instead of next to my blind. I know for a fact that no black bear could have broken that tree like that. Needless to say, my guess is that my stool is probably still on that ridge because I never went back. That's the exact description of that tree that I showed you guys broken on the side of Logan Road a couple weeks back when I was in the middle of nowhere. Remember that one? same deal, green leaves. And a whole miles of the same size trees on the side of the road and nothing else broken. Sorry. I'm going out of order, like I said I would, but here's my third experience. Me and a couple buddies had been tipping a few wobble pops one night at a local watering hole. After closing time, we were on our way back from the bar in my 74 Chevy LUV pickup. I spilled my beer in my lap, which ended with my truck being in the ditch in the middle of nowhere. In the middle of nowhere, UP. As we stood on the road trying to think of our next best course of action, we heard some weird shit in the woods opposite from where my truck was. The noises were like chattering teeth. We thought maybe we had woke up and pissed off a big squirrel. Our choices were to walk to a house, wake up and piss someone off and call for help, or just walk the 2 miles to my friend's house and get his truck to pull mine out of the place it was currently parked. We began our walk to my friend's house. Shortly after we started walking, we noticed that something was keeping pace with us. Whatever it was walking in some real thick, nasty woods just inside the trees on the north side of the road. We would stop to listen, and it would stop almost as quickly as we did. All three of us got sober pretty damn quick. We would walk, it would walk. We agreed it sounded like a big man walking in the woods, definitely on 2 legs. We tried talking to him/it, but never got a reply. We threatened it, said horrible things about its mama, even mentioning our opinions that it was a result of incest. Nothing worked. It refused to talk back. We were all hunters and agreed that it was not a deer or other 4-legged critter. We ran. It stayed right with us and would stop within 1 or 2 steps after we stopped. Then we walked back towards my truck. It turned around and kept pace. One of my friends and myself had been in the military, so I quietly said, "We're going to do an about face." We put the non-military friend in the middle and told him to follow our moves. The moon was just bright enough for us to each see each other. I said softly, "About face." We performed the move perfectly. We then stopped after 3 steps. We could hear it in plain as day, as it too turned around but waited for us to start walking again before it did. It paralleled us just inside the tree line until we finally came to a corner at a house with a yard that was mowed up to that woods. I guess it didn't want to come out into the open because we didn't hear it anymore after we rounded the corner. We were all happy that we only had about half a mile to go. When we returned to my truck to pull it out, there were baseball to softball sized rocks laying all over the flat bed of my truck that hadn't been there when we left. We yanked my truck out in what was certainly record time and got the hell out of there. A few months went by and my friend that lived a half a mile from the house on the corner where the thing in the woods quit following us ran into the owner of the home in the local grocery store. He asked the man if he had ever heard anything weird coming out of the woods near his house. He said the guy turned as white as a ghost, left his cart full of groceries, got in his car, and left. He then said that there was a realtor sign in the guy's yard 2 days later. Within a week, that man and his family had moved away. My friend said he never heard where they went. So far, the house has been sold and bought 14 times since then, and currently it sits empty. That's creepy. Okay, here's my much-awaited second experience. When I became a knower and lost every doubt that these sabe beings exist. I'd gone to the Upper Peninsula to get some poles to make a tree fort for my young sons. We didn't have any trees big enough, so I cut some 16-foot cedar logs and strapped them to the top of my '88 Dodge Caravan to take home with me. I arrived at my buddy's place on Friday night. He was in college and living in the dorms. He wasn't going to come until Saturday morning. I got to his place around 10 p.m., so I just rolled up my sleeping bag in the back of the van and watched the stars through the sunroof until I fell asleep. I don't know what woke me, but around 1:30, I was suddenly wide awake. I could see out of most of the windows. The moon was bright, but I couldn't see the stars through the sunroof. My friend lived very primitively in the middle of a cedar swamp. He had no electricity or running water. The nearest street light was 3 miles away. And that's also where the nearest neighbor lived. Light pollution wasn't the issue. That's when I noticed the face. It was looking down at me through the sunroof. Dark hair all around the face. It looked like a giant human, but a lot hairier and with a very broad nose. You know what I'm going to read next, right? I'm going to read that again, so the pattern sinks in. It looked like a giant human. I had my .357 Magnum under my pillow and I wanted to feel it in my hand. I felt like something was holding me down. I couldn't move. I had a flashback of being paralyzed the way I had been after an accident while I was serving in the United States Navy. I just couldn't move. My brain was telling me my arms to get my gun, but I was completely paralyzed. Finally, the face lifted from the sunroof and disappeared from my view. I watched as a very large and hairy torso passed the side windows of my van. It walked across the driveway behind my van and disappeared into the woods. As soon as it was gone, I was able to move again. I unzipped my sleeping bag, grabbed my gun, opened up the side door, and shined my 1 million candle power spotlight around and saw nothing. I then figured it was safe and went outside to urinate. I listened very closely and couldn't hear anything. The woods were completely silent. I don't even think the mosquitoes were buzzing. My hair was standing on end like wire. I figured there wasn't much else that I could do, so I crawled back into my sleeping bag and started thinking about what just happened. I didn't get any more sleep that night, and for many years I tried to convince myself that it was a nightmare. My problem in convincing myself was the next morning. I could see where something had leaned up against the van and had brushed the dust off of it. There were also places where the dust had been brushed off the silver paint on the van all the way down the side. I was also able to see where something had walked through the weeds and grass by the absence of the dew. I can still see the face in my mind's eye like it was yesterday, and I know something is out there, it's huge, it's hairy, and it'll scare the crap out of you if you're witness to seeing it. I told my buddy about it when I arrived later that morning. He just kind of smiled and said, "I told you that you might meet some of my friends if you stayed here when I wasn't here." When he passed away 11 years ago, he left me the 10 acres. I've been up there many times since becoming the owner of his property. It has a very sentimental value to me. When I'm there, I truly enjoy the peace and quiet. However, it will be a very cold day in hell before I ever spend the night there again. Thanks, Mr. Isdall, for all you have done and continue to do for the human race. Your dedication and hard work is not going unnoticed by so many. You're truly a living hero. I appreciate those kind words. I absolutely appreciate the kind words. More so, I appreciate you coming forward like a true hero and sharing your truth with all the people here, as well as your time, your valuable time. That's what heroes do. Heroes share all they got openly with their community, with their people, and they donate their precious, precious time to do it, right? That's what heroes do. You're a hero, man. You're all heroes. Anyway, sun's going down. Sun's going down. This sucker will be up at 5 o'clock in the morning. Back to normal. Finally. Tell you what, when I go in the water, go guiding, it throws us all for a big loop. Everything gets tougher. I think I just got informed we've got 5 more days to do. I thought I was done. I love doing it. Don't get me wrong. I love taking people into the wild, into the real world, and watching them light up and just love every second of it and see the same beauty that I see all the time. And I love hearing it from people who are first timers, and watching them smile and take as many pictures as they can and create memories that they're never ever going to forget. I love that part. It's the no sleep and the exhaustion and the loss of time they can get to you sometimes, but it's no big deal. I'm doing what I love to do, right? I'm doing what I love to do. Priority. Here we go. I'll be back. Hopefully I'll be live again quite shortly. I think the ladies, go out to their private cabin on the weekends. I'm not sure if they're gone or not, and I'll find out, because they're going to be my first victims in here live. Long as it's cold enough. It's too hot in here during the day. Share my story at howtohunt.com. Share my story at howtohunt.com. That's where you get everything heard word for word. Alright? You're a safe place here. We'll be back later on, you guys.